Wow, good news, I thought. So I called Sheldon Cohen because he used to be the IRS commissioner, he wrote the tax code, and he was also general counsel to the IRS. He is a true expert, and I couldn't find a better person to answer my questions. He graciously agreed to my interview. The reason I'm doing this documentary is because there are many people in America today who believe that there's no law that requires them to pay an income tax or file a 1040. And there are many people going to jail for it, fighting over it.
The Internal Revenue Code is authorized by the 16th Amendment.
I think it should be clarified. I think government should be transparent to the people. Why doesn't the IRS commissioner sit down with them and just explain it in clear English? Why?
I don't think they really care. They don't think. I think they're just playing word games.
You don't think they're sincere people? You know?
No, I don't think they're sincere people.
What does voluntary compliance mean? And why does the IRS code say it's voluntary to comply, not mandatory?
That's a word euphemism we use. We use voluntary compliance when we talk about traffic signals. Most people at 2 o'clock in the morning, do you stop at a red light?
Yeah.
Is there a cop there?
Sometimes I don't.
Well, I do, and most of us do. Most of us do.
Right.
But that's voluntary compliance.
That was a complete perversion of logic. Traffic laws state that it is mandatory to stop at a red light. The IRS code says it's voluntary to comply. Mandatory and voluntary are the complete opposite of each other. Yet he wants us to believe that they mean the same thing. So can the government criminally prosecute somebody of information put on their 1040?
Yes.
Right, so doesn't that violate the Fifth Amendment?
No.
But the Fifth Amendment says I don't have to do anything that incriminates myself.
Well, it doesn't incriminate you to put your income down.
But you said before I could be put in jail for it. The commissioner wants us to believe that although the IRS demands that you fill out the 1040 and you can go to jail for it, that they are not violating your Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination. That is absurd. Isn't it true that the word income is not defined anywhere in the Internal Revenue Code?
The law says that the government has a right to tax income from any source derived.
So, but the word income is not defined in the code. It just says income without a definition
That's right.
of what income is.
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah.
But there are many different kinds of taxes. Well, how can an American citizen know what income is if the code doesn't define it? If they're paying an income
Because
tax...
the courts have all defined it.
Do you remember what constitutional attorney Edwin Vieira said?
The definition of income in the Constitution was given in the Eisner versus Macomber case, and it turns on gains or profits that are made from some activity.
So the Supreme Court has ruled income is not wages, it's not labor, it's gain from corporate activity. I believe that a man's labor is his private property.
That's your view, but it's not the law.
The Supreme Court's even said your labor is your private property. When I go to work for somebody, it's a trade. It's an even exchange. I do some work, you give me some money.
In 1916, we had the Bruchaber case and the Stanton case. And the Bruchaber case and the Stanton case said that the 16th Amendment gave the government no new taxing power.
I'm not going to argue the niceties of that with you.
And it came up again in a case called Peck versus Lowe, where the Supreme Court said the 16th Amendment did not extend Congress's taxing power to any new or accepted subjects. In other words, if you weren't taxable before the 16th, you weren't taxable after the 16th.
Today I interviewed a juror, okay, who sat on a case, and they found the person not guilty for lack of filing, okay? And I asked her why they found him not guilty. And she said because the IRS couldn't show us the law that made him liable to file a 1040.
All they need to do, if there is a law, is to show us the law, which of course they never did.
And the reason they didn't do it was why?
Because there is no law.
Title 26 requires you to file a return.
But doesn't Title 26 have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court decisions?
You're going to take a 1920 case and superimpose it on the whole Internal Revenue Code that was written after it? No, that's not.
I can't believe what I just heard. Rewind.
You're going to take a 1920 case and superimpose it on the whole Internal Revenue Code that was written after it? No, that's not.
Remember he said earlier the Internal Revenue Code was authorized by the 16th Amendment?
The Internal Revenue Code is authorized by the 16th Amendment.
Remember, the Supreme Court said the 16th Amendment did not give the government any new taxing power. These decisions have never been overturned. Let's listen further. Can the lower courts overrule the Supreme Court?
No.
How are they putting people in jail today for not paying a tax on their labor when the Supreme Court said they don't have to? Doesn't the IRS code have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court? That's my big
Aaron,
question.
this is a waste of time.
Well, let me
Because
just-
whatever I say, you're not going to believe.
He's right. I don't believe him. And neither should you. He wants us to believe we should obey the IRS code, which is being enforced in violation of the many Supreme Court decisions. If
No,
the
no, no,
Supreme
you
Court
don't.
made a decision...
Thank you, Aaron. I think we're finished.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cohen, you're doing that.
Well, I'm sorry that you constantly re-argue the point. You're liable because the law says that you're liable,
But
and the
doesn't-
courts say the law says you're liable,
Doesn't-
and that's why you're liable.
You see, he's talking about the lower courts, who are not in compliance with the Supreme Court, as they have to be. Doesn't the court have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court?
The Supreme Court has so held.
Where?
You caught me unprepared.
I'll come back to
Well,
that.
I don't want to do that.
But let me ask you a hypothetical question.
No. You're making silly arguments here.
Why is the Supreme Court decision a silly argument?
Well, because it's inapplicable.
That made my heart stop. He just said Supreme Court decisions do not apply to the IRS. That's the behavior you would expect from a totalitarian country, maybe China or Russia or Cuba. Not from America. They're just making up the law as they go along. Now I knew the tax honesty movement was right. The IRS thrives on intimidation and fear, not by law. It's no different than a criminal protection racket, using force to extract your money from you. Then the former IRS commissioner, now working at a prestigious Washington law firm, threatens me. Watch.
Aaron, you understand Yiddish. Cornish to helfen.
For those of you who don't understand Yiddish, that means nothing will help you.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you think should be the proper income tax rate?
Well, the best would be zero. I mean, we live most of our history with zero income tax, but you'd have to have a proper sized government. You'd have to have a proper role for government. You can't be the policeman of the world and not have an income tax. So I would not have all my troops around the world. I'd bring the troops home, and I wouldn't have a military-industrial complex that demands so much, but I wouldn't have a welfare state either. And under those conditions, you don't need an income tax. And I think that's the way it should be.
You got to raise money somehow, right? I mean, so how would you raise money if you had 0% income tax?
Well, how did they raise it before 1913? You know, they had excise taxes and some import taxes, but it wasn't a matter of how you raised the money, it was who was demanding the money. But there's an endless demand when you concede so much to the military-industrial complex and a militaristic foreign policy, and you say that you have to redistribute wealth from cradle to grave and take care of people. I think when people take money from you and give it to somebody else, that's equivalent to stealing from you. I don't want to take any of your money. I want you to invest it and create jobs. So, and I'm personally convinced that I'm on the side of the humanitarian side of this, because if you care about poor people and jobs, you're going to have them more likely if you do it that way rather than the government spending the money. Because just look at where we've been with all this spending and printing of money and bailing out. Who gets all the benefits when you run a system like that where you're pretending to redistribute wealth? You serve the special interests in the powerful corporations. Then when you get into trouble, who gets bailed out? They get bailed out. Wall Streets and the banks get bailed out. And who gets stuck? It's the taxpayers. That's why you need income tax, so you take care of the wealth.
I want to get rid of the IRS. I want to get rid of the income tax, but I want to reduce the size and scope of government to the point where we don't need the income tax. We didn't have an income tax up until 1913, and we did quite well. But since we've had the income tax, government has grown by leaps and bounds, and it has allowed our government to get involved in things that they shouldn't be involved, policing our personal habits, policing the economy, and policing the world. If you don't want the government to do that, you don't need the income tax. So a lot of people ask me, what am I going to replace it with? I don't want to replace it with anything. I want to reduce it. But the responsible question is that, what are you going to do about all the spending? And my answer is we should cut the spending. We just don't need to cut the spending, because when government's allowed to do this, they do a great deal of harm and they don't really help us. I want to release all the creative energy I can and all the productive effort of individuals that are free to pursue their own adventure, and we certainly need to get the government out of the way, and under those conditions you don't need an income tax. We should repeal the 16th Amendment.
If you were president, would you work to phase out the IRS?
Immediately.
That's what they call a softball.
And you can only do that if you change our ideas about what the role of government ought to be. If you think the government has to take care of us from cradle to grave, and if you think our government should police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy that we cannot manage, you can't get rid of the IRS. But if you want to lower taxes, and if you don't want the government to quit printing the money to come up with shortfall and cause all the inflation, you have to change policy.
Congressman, you agree? You've written in the past that income taxes violate the 16th Amendment. Explain that idea.
Well, I'm more concerned about the way the 16th Amendment was passed, and I don't think it was technically correct. And I think Mr. Bannister's correct, and technically we shouldn't have to pay the income tax. It's just that I've chosen a different tactic. I think that we should change it in a more deliberate fashion, and that's why I'm a legislator. But, you know, we have the tax problem, and it's going to be with us for a long time, but this is a consequence of the spending problem. So that's why I spend as much time on trying to cut the spending, so there's no incentive to collect these taxes. That's our biggest problem. But the way the tax system is run, it's run roughshod over the people. We don't have due process of law. We're guilty until proven innocent. It's just a horrible system, and we have to do something. Even if we can't get to the point where there's a lot less spending, we at least have to collect revenues in a much better manner than the income tax.
So do you sympathize with the estimated 1 million Americans who don't pay taxes based on principle?
Well, yeah, I sympathize with them because I know what they're up against. Some of them do it out of desperation. Some of them do it as part-time just to survive, to feed their families. And economically, they serve the country well because they have more income, they spend more money. But that means you're defying the law, and that's a challenge, and you have to depend on the courts. And I just haven't chosen to do it that way. I'd like to legalize what they're doing.
The topic, sticking on the economy, though, a familiar face asking a very simple question.
President Bush made a commitment when he ran for president in 2000 and 2004 that he would oppose and veto any tax increase that Congress sent him. My question to each of the candidates is, would you promise to the people watching this right now that you will oppose and veto any effort to raise taxes as long as you're president?
Congressman Paul?
I have never voted for a tax increase, never will, but the tax issue is only one half of it. You can easily pledge not to raise taxes, but you have to cut spending.
And I would pose this question, that there's data out there that shows that 47% of the households don't pay federal income tax, 51% of wage earners don't pay federal income tax, with 72 welfare programs out there. So if you could fix the Fed, are the rest of these a problem, and how do you really address those so that it's effective?
Well, you know, I would say that when people ask me that half the people don't even pay taxes, I say we're halfway there. But no, I know you don't want me to talk about the Fed, but it's the Fed that causes the deficits and the entitlement, because we don't have to tax people, we don't have to borrow the money. We know, everybody knows that if Congress runs up these debts, the Fed is the lender of last resort. They're the creator of the money of last resort. So you can't address entitlements unless you look at the monetary system.
Congressman?
The most sinister of all taxes is the inflation tax, and it is the most regressive. It hits the poor and the middle class. When you destroy a currency by creating money out of thin air to pay the bills, the value of the dollar goes down and people get hit with a higher cost of living. It's the middle class that's being wiped out. It is the most evil of all taxes.
But I would like to mention something that was said earlier about a tax cut. And how do you pay for a tax cut? I think that's the wrong principle, because when you give people their money back, it's their money. You don't have to pay for it. That means the government owns all of our money if you look that way. All right. So we have to cut the spending, and a good way to start, there's a little embassy we built over in Baghdad. It cost us $1 billion. It's bigger than the Vatican. That's what's bankrupting this country, and that's the easy place to cut. That's where we should be cutting.
Governor, I want to ask about race and unemployment. In 2006, the unemployment rate of black high school graduates, that's high school graduates, was 33% higher than the unemployment rate for white high school dropouts. What do you think accounts for that inequity?
Paul? Walter Williams, a very astute free market economist, has studied this extensively. And he has found that prior to minimum wage laws, there was no discrepancy like this. So he put a lot of blame on the minimum wage law. Once government gets interfering, this takes away opportunities. And I believe there is a lot of truth to this, because it eliminates an opportunity and a chance for a marginal worker. So once again, though, the economy is supported only when you have a sound economy perpetuated by government with sound policies. You have to have sound money. You have to have minimum taxes. You have to have wise foreign policy. But I have a bill in that might help a lot of people, black or white or whomever. I have a bill in that would immediately help these people who are trying to get a start, that they would never have to pay any taxes or payroll taxes if they just happen to be a waiter or waitress, to give them a chance to get ahead and get a good job.